Well, good afternoon. Is that close enough? Can you hear me all? Thank you to the National Press Club and Jeff Ballou for this opportunity and wonderful welcome. I'm delighted to be here with you today. At Pfizer, our culture values straight talk. I actually have a coin on with me, but I won't bring it out today. It expresses that philosophy. So today I want to have a candid conversation with you about the risks of drug discovery and development, the economic contributions of our industry, the barriers to patient access to affordable health care, including medicines, and some observations regarding how we can create a healthcare system that supports innovation and provides patient access. Drug discovery and development. If you think back to what treatments were available in the 1940s, I know most of us can't do that, that were available for infections, depression, ulcers, blood pressure, Parkinson's. There was almost nothing. You could look at a TV ad and see a patient in front of a doctor in black and white and the medicine cabinet behind that physician, and he'd turn and it was bare. Today, that is not the situation. Today, we have incredible medicines that have turned fatal illnesses like HIV and AIDS into chronic conditions, slowed progression for rheumatoid arthritis, cured disease such as Hep C, helped to prevent childhood illnesses with vaccines, provided treatment for painful ulcers and GERD. And if you have GERD, which is reflux, it makes your life a misery. It's not a trivial thing to be able to take a pill once a day and not have that issue. And of course, GERD leads to cancer and other conditions. And in cancer, we are developing new immune therapies that harness the natural ability of the body's immune system to recognize and fight cancer, along with the other amazing discoveries we've made with small molecules and chemotherapy in the previous 20 years. In fact, in 2014 and 15, more than 40 new medicines were approved by the FDA. Many of these medicines were for rare diseases, cancers, and other conditions where there were no good treatments available. The pipeline across the biopharmaceutical industry for new medicines has never been more promising, with more than 7,000 medicines under development around the world. And an average 70% of drugs across the pipeline are potentially first-in-class medicines. That is, that drug has not been discovered before. That mechanism has not been discovered before. So to what do we attribute this progress? I believe it's the result of focused investment in a highly risky undertaking of drug discovery and development, combined with advances in basic research from our universities and the NIH and other types of institutions. From discovery through FDA approval, developing a new medicine on average takes 10 to 15 years and costs $2.6 billion. Now that's the number from Boston University. And less than 12% of the potential medicines that make it to phase 1 clinical trials are approved by the FDA. Now you can look at this study and it's complex and you can quibble about how it was done. I can give you a very easy way of knowing what it costs to develop a drug. Pfizer spends $8 billion a year on research and development. We're lucky if we produce 3 drugs a year. I don't need the study to know what it costs to bring new drugs to society in today's environment. For example, between 1988 and 2014, there were 96 unsuccessful attempts and only 7 new drugs developed to treat melanoma. 96 unsuccessful attempts. In brain cancer, there were 75 unsuccessful attempts and only 3 new drugs. And in lung cancer, there was 167 unsuccessful attempts and 10 new drugs, one of which was Pfizer's Xalkori. To discover and develop a new drug, the biopharmaceutical industry spends on average 6 times more in R&D as a percentage of sales compared to other major industries in the US. In 2015, the industry invested a combined $58.8 billion in research and development. That's $28 billion more than the entire NIH health budget, of which only a fraction is dedicated to drug discovery. The drug discovery process is complex and not well understood. After 38 years in the industry, I tell you, it's probably one of the most complex undertakings that humanity has. To take an idea and shepherd it through the drug discovery process over 15 years, ensuring excellence at every stage and data at every stage to finally get a drug that can be taken by humans with a positive risk-benefit equation. So let's briefly review what it takes to discover, develop, and bring a new medicine to patients in somewhat layman's terms. The process begins with basic research, undoubtedly, done by researchers within academic institutions and government institutions like the National Institute of Health. These researchers postulate, sometimes find, biologic pathways that give insights into a disease or possible approaches for treating that disease. This is a critical step, but it is light years away from having a medicine that can treat your condition. The pharmaceutical industry draws from this basic research findings once they've been validated. Normally, in academia, you publish, it gets validated by somebody else, then validated, you understand, the understanding improves. At that point, the industry may begin a drug discovery process from those original scientific findings. Our scientists take this understanding and translate it into a research hypothesis, often through animal models that begin 10 to 15-year journey to get a medicine to patients. We discover a molecule, create a molecule, synthesize a molecule, whether large or small, that we believe will interact in the right way with the target pathway. We run studies to ensure the molecules, large or small, have what we believe is the desired biological effect. We verify the compound's pharmacokinetics and pharmacodynamics profile and how it affects the body. And we run multiple toxicology studies to determine safety prior to beginning initial trials in humans. At that point, we then conduct early studies referred to as phase 1 and phase 2 to understand the right dosing and assess the safety, efficacy, and quality of the compound and identify the right patient population. Once phase 2 has been passed for safety and efficacy, we conduct large phase 3 trials, thousands of patients. The largest one Pfizer ever conducted was 85,000 patients, to prove the risk-benefit of the drug. And then we submit this data to a regulatory body like the FDA for approval. This process has many interactions and false starts. Very often you start with a basic drug substance, you believe it's going to be efficacious, but it's toxic. Or you remove the toxicity and you find it's no longer efficacious. There's multiple attempts to try and get the right medicine with the right distribution that's risk-benefit profile is favorable. To best illustrate this process, I'll share with you a Pfizer example using Ibrance, our first-in-class drug for the treatment of advanced breast cancer, one of the deadliest and most poorly understood cancers. The Ibrance journey started in 1990 with original research done by independent researchers that identified and characterized cyclin-dependent kinases, which are key regulators of cell growth division. Through collaboration with researchers at UCLA, we were able to identify the right patient population for our compound. And by 2008, we had an acceptable molecule that we believe appropriately interfered with the cyclin kinase to disrupt the growth of tumors. This result was that after 25 years of initial basic research, we had a CDK inhibitor. And 7 years after the first patient was dosed in clinical trials, Ibrance was approved by the FDA. More than 50,000 patients in the US alone have now been treated by Ibrance since its approval in 2015. And before the drug was even approved and launched, we began conversations with the healthcare community. We spoke to more than 80 payers, more than 20 breast cancer experts, and more than 100 oncologists to build an understanding of the value of this medicine, what it does against competition, what advances it gives, how it changes people's quality of life, how it extends their life. And based on that input, we negotiated with the plans and the payers a price and access for Ibrance. We have continued to make significant investments in Ibrance. It has been studied in patients with early breast cancer, and there are 34 ongoing investigator-initiated research programs across various non-breast cancer tumors. And after 2 years on the market, 2 years, there are 2 competitors, one approved and one in development. And that's how the market evolves. You get a patent on your molecule, you don't get a patent on treating a disease. And your molecule has to have superior efficacy or superior characteristics to be successful. And more we're followed in very quickly by competitors with similar-looking molecules. Today, there are other therapy stories like Ibrance, Pfizer's Alcori, with patients with advanced non-small cell cancer whose tumors are ALK positive and ROS positive, Merck's Keytruda for melanoma and non-small cell lung cancer, and Gilead's Havoni for hepatitis C. These new therapies are the result of improvements in our understanding of biology, enhanced collaboration and translational research with academics and research institutions, and huge investment and risk-taking by the industry. Let's talk about economic contribution to the industry. A continued stream of new treatments won't flow if society is not willing to fund and support a modern biopharmaceutical industry that gets cures to patients. I'd like to note that in 2014, the biopharmaceutical industry in the United States represented 3.8% of total U.S. output, which amounts to an impact of more than $1.2 trillion. When you take into account the value of goods and services produced by the industry and the total impact on the economy, $1.2 trillion. This includes the economic activity of its workforce and more than 4.4 million jobs across the U.S. economy, including direct and indirect vendor and supplier jobs. That being said, I want to be clear. We understand our responsibility. Every scientist understands their responsibility, and everybody in Pfizer understands our responsibility to produce medicines that bring significant value and that are competitively priced. We are working towards an understanding by society of the investment we make, the risks we take, and when by we, I mean our shareholders, the people who fundamentally fund Pfizer, and an appropriate return on the totality of our investment. A successful drug will normally be profitable. Unfortunately, there's a lot of dry holes on the way to a successful drug. And you need to have a cash flow to support the entirety of the biopharmaceutical ecosystem. Let's talk about access and transparency. We understand the access issues for patients and what they face with copays and high deductibles and the need for value chain transparency in this process. We give away for free to 250,000 patients in the US, 1.7 million prescriptions in 2016 because the process is broken. Those patients need to come to us as last resort because the insurance system is failing them. Transparency should allow patients and physicians to make the right choice for the intervention that delivers the most value. That's transparency. How does the physician know what the best product is? How does the patient know that they're getting value from that product? However, we know that patients are paying higher out-of-pocket costs and a greater percentage of the costs associated with life-saving or medicines that improve their condition as compared to expensive interventions like hospital admissions, emergency rooms, physician's diagnosis. On an average, patients in our insurance system pay 3% of the cost of hospital care out of your own pocket. However, you're asked to pay 15% out of your pocket of drug costs. This is not transparency. Most consumers do not know this. Rather, medicine reimbursement costs are often used by the system, insurers and providers, to avoid adverse selection. Adverse selection is when you have a higher proportion of sick people in your plan than your competitors. When considering transparency in patient access, the value of the entire healthcare system needs to be taken into account, not just pharmaceuticals, which represent 12% of the total healthcare system's costs. We need to consider two factors, I believe. Visibility and understanding of what you're getting for your insurance, make it clear to the patient, and a patient-focused benefit design that meets the patient's needs. I'd like you to use the analogy that patients need solid insurance, good insurance, similar to the type of insurance you have for your homes. If a person's home is destroyed by fire, their insurance company covers the majority of the cost to rebuild the house. People know what they're getting. They're able to rebuild their house. When it comes to your health, you should be able to have insurance to cover diseases like cancer or rheumatoid arthritis without having to bear the burden of the majority of the expense. Individuals cannot afford modern pharmaceuticals. It has to be done through an insurance system or a risk-sharing system. The cost to produce and bring safe, effective drugs to market are out of the reach of individual pockets. However, the way insurance plans are currently designed, prescription costs are shifting to patients in order to contain costs in the short term. A lot of the plans now have large copays, $6,000 deductibles before you get to any repayment, no first dollar payment for pharmaceuticals. This is not good insurance. There are little incentives for the prevention or cure over the long term. In many cases, benefit designs are constructed to avoid sick patients. For instance, previous to the Affordable Care Act, we have a product called Chantix, which helps you stop smoking. Insurance companies wouldn't cover it. Why not? They don't want smokers on their insurance rolls. They're a bad risk. So we had great difficulty getting access for Chantix in the insurance system. Hepatitis C, let's look at that example. One example is the pricing discussion that occurred when hepatitis C treatment was introduced. The crux of the debate was not about the value of the drug. The evidence demonstrates it's cost-effective, and I'll discuss that in a moment. The debate was really about the short-term impact on Medicare and managed care budgets of an uninspected, expensive, high-value medicine which they hadn't budgeted for. They have no risk adjustments for it. So before Hep C was available, the average annual cost of the healthcare system for treating a patient with Hep C, depending on which stage they were in, was $60,000 per year for patients with end-stage liver disease, $112,000 per patient with liver cancer, and $500,000 per patient for those receiving a liver transplant. An average expected lifetime patient cost to treat all stages of Hep C was $205,000, approximately. Compare these costs to the fact that more than 90% of patients with the most common form of Hep C can expect to be cured with the new Hep C drug in as little as 8 weeks. This is a lifetime cost now of slightly more than $40,000. And because of intense competition, the cost is now 50% less than the initial cost it was launched at. Returns versus, let's look at returns of the industry. I think there are many ways that we can, the pharmaceutical industry, we can point out the benefits to society. There are various ways of looking at it. The transparency bills you're seeing in most of the states are not an appropriate way of measuring the benefit of the pharmaceutical industry. The drugs developed by the industry have built-in incentives for innovation and cost containment through patent expirations. To Jeff's point, after considering that the drug, once it's approved, only has half of its patent life left. Patent life is not 20 years. The effective maximum patent life you can get is 14. Once the patent is expired, the drug is broadly available in form of generics. Today, more than 90% of new prescriptions offer generics in our healthcare system that are available forever to society at the price of generics. They would not have been available if they weren't discovered, if there was no innovation money for their discovery. Another indicator broadly of equitable return is shown by the industry's financial performance. Of course, a successful drug is highly profitable. That's a real insight. If you look at the average return of the pharmaceutical industry over the last 5 years compared to 25 other major industrial sectors, including consumer, software, services, telecom, energy, and insurance and healthcare, managed healthcare. The pharmaceutical industry ranks 19th in terms of price-to-earnings ratio out of 25, a key indicator of the growth prospects of a company, the price-to-earnings index. 11th in terms of return on equity, ninth in terms of return on capital, and ninth in terms of return on assets. I see no evidence of extraordinary return in the pharmaceutical industry compared to the other industries that are in the Bloomberg index. It's also noteworthy that since March 2010, the return of the pharmaceutical industry has been lower than the largest health insurance companies, including United Health, Aetna, Cigna, Humana, and Centene. As a whole, these companies outperformed the S&P 500 stock index, which returned 135% over this time period. Collectively, these insurance companies gained nearly 300%, including dividends, while the pharmaceutical industry returned 91%, including dividends, less than the S&P and far less than insurance companies. Overall, I think it's fair to say that we're being responsible when it comes to the pricing of our medicines. We're producing great value for society and simultaneously taking large financial risks due to the uncertainty of the drug. We don't set prices, we negotiate prices. We negotiate on the value of the drug, the value to society, and the arbiters of that are the insurance company and the payers. There are two examples to demonstrate, if you want more specifically, the value of what we do. In 10 years, statins use has generated nearly, and this is from accredited health economic magazines, nearly 1.3 trillion in economic value to the US, of which around 950 billion was retained by society, with around 20% of the value accruing to the industry through the revenue from selling the drugs. So we retain 25% of the total value of statins. At the same time, the cost of statins have now gone down 90%. Society now has that benefit of that invention forever at generic pricing. From 1988 to 2000, improvements in cancer survival created an estimated 23 million additional life years, creating 1.9 trillion of additional societal value. 81% of that value accrued to society, 19% accrued to the pharmaceutical industry. However, we understand that while drugs are highly cost-effective, our health ecosystem is making it difficult for patients to get the health care they need at a cost they can afford, especially in life-saving medicines. I believe we have a collective opportunity to start mending our broken system by working with all stakeholders and making sure the voice of the patient is heard. We believe there are 4 tenets required to create a healthcare system that meets patients' needs. We need to provide all patients with access to quality healthcare coverage that includes preventive care, access to cost-effective interventions like medicine, and comprehensive care for conditions like cancer. We stand willing to play our part in helping patients have access to those medicines. We do already with our patient assistance programs. We need to have incentives for prevention-based healthcare that reward people for good health and provide financial incentives that enable providers to manage risk and encourage prevention. We need to get the right incentives in the system, incentives to pay for health, not for the treatment of illness. If health plans and providers were compensated for improving health over the long term, and patients were rewarded for investing in their health, all parties would benefit, most especially patients who would have good insurance and patient-centered benefit designs that cover high-value treatments at affordable copays. We need to base decisions regarding healthcare on long-term value and not 1 year's budget. In other words, let's look at both sides of the ledger. Let's just look at this year's pharmacy bill. Let's look at all of the costs in the healthcare system and all the healthcare costs saved while using this medicine. Long-term outcomes versus short-term financial budgetary considerations. And we need to base our solution on competitive market principles, get the right incentives for the whole healthcare sector in the right place. Specifically for the pharmaceutical industry, I'd say we need policies that spur public and private funding. Most laboratories, most companies like Pfizer have a huge number of projects we don't progress. We just can't simply afford it. We just cannot simply cover the cost of capital. We need increased investment in manufacturing. We need regulatory reform that accelerates the potential of today's scientific advancements and accelerates the development and approval of life-changing medicines while also eliminating the backlog of generics. And we need favourable tax and trade policies that create a level playing field, protect American intellectual property, and remove barriers to access. We believe committing to each of these ideas can lead to an efficient market-based system for all segments of the healthcare ecosystem, providers, payers, biopharmaceutical companies, and more importantly, and most importantly, patients. With that, I'd be very pleased to take your questions. Thank you very much.